Good afternoon. I'm going to call this field hearing on January 6th to order. From time to time, members of Congress hold field hearings to function as force multipliers for the investigative, analytical, and legislative work of our various committees. We are now moving toward the appropriations process, where we'll have to make key decisions about authorities and capabilities within the Department of Justice and the FBI, and it is my hope that we get a more fulsome understanding of the events of January 6th and the follow-on actions that have concerned many of us in the Congress regarding people's treatment and civil rights. And to start our hearing today, we've got a short video.
Despite millions of Americans watching the events of January 6th unfold on their TV screens, there have been several conspiracy theories, including one that the federal government facilitated the riot.
The existence of unnamed, as yet uncharged co-conspirators does not mean that they were working undercover for the FBI.
That is the crux of this FBI conspiracy.
And all of these conspiracy theory allegations have been debunked up and down.
How many FBI agents or confidential informants actively participated in the events of January 6th?
Sir, I can't answer that.
Did the FBI have confidential human sources embedded within the January 6th protesters?
As I'm sure you can appreciate, I have to be very careful about what I can say about when we do and do not, and where we have and have not used confidential human sources.
Why can't you just send us, give us access to the 11,000 hours of video that's available? Because there may be UC's undercover officers or CHS's confidential human sources on those videos whose identity we need to protect.
There might have been some kind of potential federal involvement with the activities on January 6th, and I thought it was important enough that it warranted our attention.
There must be moments where you think, if we would have known, if we could have infiltrated this group or found out what they were doing. And that, do you have those moments?
Absolutely. And in that testimony to the Senate, you believe that Christopher Wray indicated that there were no confidential informants and no FBI assets that were present at the Capitol on January 6th that were part of the violent riot. Isn't that right?
Yes, sir.
The Washington field office told Boston, well, you know what? We can't give you the evidence because it might disclose the very CIs and UCs that you were concerned about. So much of our work has uncovered some of the things that initially were deemed as conspiracy theories, but we now have sworn evidence to prove. But that is not the end of the story. The critical feature of our gathering today is to better understand how people were treated in the follow-on to January 6th. And in that regard, I'm very pleased to welcome our witnesses. Jeff Clark is currently Senior Fellow and Director of Litigation at the Center for Renewing America. He is former Acting Assistant Attorney General for the Civil Division, holding that time during the Trump administration after being confirmed by the Senate. Jeff served as the Senate-confirmed Assistant Attorney General for the Environment and Natural Resources Division. He holds degrees from Harvard University in Economics and Russian History, from the University of Delaware in Urban Affairs, and from the Georgetown University Law Center. Outside of politics, Jeff serves as professor at the George Mason School of Law, and he has been an attorney at Kirkland & Ellis. We also have today with us Ed Martin. Ed is president of the Eagle Forum Education and Legal Defense Fund. Formerly, Ed Martin was a member of the Republican National Committee and chaired the Missouri Republican Party. As an attorney in the private sector, Ed's legal work involved him with the Institute for Justice and Human Action Network and the Americans United for Life. He possesses degrees in medical ethics and philosophy, served as Missouri Governor Matt Blunt's chief of staff, and he currently hosts the Pro America Reports podcast. We're also joined today by Jerry Perna. Jerry Perna's nephew, Matthew Perna, was a January 6th defendant who was subjected to months of delays by the justice system. Matthew was charged for entering the Capitol on January 6th, but peacefully surrendered to authorities. Matthew's sentencing was scheduled for March 2022, but this was delayed by the prosecution. Mr. Perna took his own life. His friends and family say that the sentencing delays broke him. Jerry Perna currently runs a website to raise awareness for her nephew's story, rememberingmattperna.com. We're also joined today by Sarah Maccabee. Sarah is the wife of Ronald Maccabee, who entered the Capitol on January 6th. a deputy sheriff. Ronald suffered aggravated a shoulder injury that day while attempting to render medical assistance to a protester, Roseanne Boylan. He has since been charged with 7 crimes, among them assaulting, resisting, or impeding a federal officer. Ronald pleaded not guilty to these charges, and video footage shows McAbee protecting and helping multiple Capitol officers who thank him for his assistance. Together, Sarah and her husband have faced crippling legal bills, a coordinated smear campaign, manipulated evidence, and Ronald remains in prison without a sentence. We're also joined today by Brandon Straka, the founder of the Walk Away campaign. Straka runs this organization, a 501c3, a political action committee, a social media campaign, and a grassroots-style political movement. Brandon was charged with disorderly conduct as a result of his presence at the Capitol on January 6th and was subsequently sentenced to 3 years of probation with 3 months of home detention. He additionally incurred thousands in fines. We're also joined today by John Strand. John is a model, writer, actor, musician, and host of Frontline Flash. During the COVID-19 pandemic, John led the Beverly Hills Freedom Rally in 2020 to defy California's lockdown orders. In support of Dr. Simone Gold, John worked as the communications director as well as the creative director of her organization, America's Frontline Doctors. John has since been sentenced to more than 2 years in prison for his presence at the Capitol on January 6th. We thank our witnesses for joining us. I'm joined currently by my colleague, Paul Gosar of Arizona, but we may have other members that I know are watching and observing this from their movements about the Capitol and who may join us as well. Mr. Clark, you've submitted written testimony. All of the testimony from today and all of the record that is being kept today will be available for members to submit for the official record of the House on the floor or for work in the Judiciary Committee upon which I serve or the Oversight Committee upon which Dr. Gosar and many of our other members serve. So thank you for your written testimony. We would ask you to summarize that in 5 minutes. You recognize Mr. Clark.
Representative Gaetz and members of the House attending today, Dr. Gosar, at this field hearing, thank you for the opportunity to testify. Let me make 7 quick points. First, one of the original sins of government that has carried and caused the poor treatment of the January 6th protester defendants is the lawless formation of the House Select Committee, the January 6th Committee, leading to it acting in a one-sided and due process-free way. That committee was gerrymandered by Speaker Pelosi, operated without a ranking member or counsel to the ranking member. Liz Cheney was granted vice chair status to try to cover that up. The committee then had a series of carefully scripted by Hollywood hearings where the entire Q&A path was pre-written and meshed with cherry-picked snippets of highly edited video and audio doctored video. The committee interviewed 1,000+ witnesses, it says, but only about 200 transcripts have been released. Second, the January 6th committee worked with regime media, the New York Times, Washington Post, CNN, and MSNBC, etc. In that way, the fake narrative that an insurrection had occurred on January 6th was blasted everywhere. Based on secretly recorded video, we now have on tape Nancy Pelosi's documentarian daughter and her friends admitting that no real insurrection ever occurred. The collective effect of the January 6th committee's shameful way of proceeding, plus the reinforcing media blitz, poisoned the jury pool in Washington, D.C. Trial venue transfers out of D.C. should have been permitted. Media narrative mongering, indeed, was also the pre-original sin, therefore, of this entire issue because it laid the groundwork for the January 6th Select Committee's hatchet jobs. Third, many of the defendants were swept up in a vast dragnet that I believe violated the Fourth Amendment because it was the equivalent of a general warrant that our framers sought to ban. This was done through the use of geofencing technology and cell phone data warrants sent to telecom providers. Additionally, many protesters arriving after President Trump's speech in the ellipse had finished did not see any signage that areas normally open to the public were closed that day, setting up a trespass trap for the unwary. Fourth, the Justice Department did not treat these cases with appropriate respect for the First Amendment rights of the protesters. The 2020 presidential election was incredibly contentious, and many citizens in this country disagreed with mainstream media pronouncements that they should, in essence, sit down and shut up about the election and how it was conducted. By contrast, I was at the Justice Department getting daily updates about the Marco Hatfield Federal Courthouse in Portland being attacked night after night after night in the summer of 2020. Insurrection is a far more appropriate moniker for that targeted Antifa lawlessness than a largely spontaneously assembled crowd being agitated by tear gas and rubber bullets. Yet the First Amendment issues led to the self-agitators in Portland being treated very differently and with special kid gloves. This takes me to my fifth point. The January 6th defendants have not been dealt with in the same fashion as the Antifa and BLM protesters in 2020 who engaged in terrible conduct, threatened the White House, did millions of damage in property in that summer in the lead up to the presidential election. This is a flat violation in terms of comparing those two categories of defendants or potential defendants of the equal protection of the laws. Many Americans think the selective prosecution on display here is blatant. Sixth, there are widespread Brady violations as to how these defendants are being dealt with today, and I'll confine that to just two areas for our purposes today. First, the concealed or underreported footage issue around the Capitol. So the House is to be commended for allowing Tucker Carlson, Julie Kelly, and John Solomon to review the footage. And second, it's hard to imagine that with 800 plus or so unreleased January 6th committee deposition transcripts, that there's not at least some exculpatory evidence in there that has not yet been seen by the relevant defendants and their lawyers. The January 6th committee, in short, acted like a star chamber, and there is no reason for this Congress to let that go on. Seventh and lastly, the judges on the federal district court here in Washington, D.C. seem to have come under the spell of the January 6th committee's original sin, and in that way they allowed the constructed mainstream media narrative to influence their decisions. And as a legal matter, they're by and large allowing a statute designed to close an obstruction of justice loophole that Arthur Anderson exploited in the Enron debacle to be applied to entirely different activity that in many instances is protected by the First Amendment and should appropriately be treated differently. As a result, Antifa and BLM revolutionaries, and it's not an exaggeration to call them that, who engaged in worse conduct largely got off scot-free, and worse yet, many of them left with bags of cash from civil settlements. By contrast, the sentences being handed down against January 6th defendants are wildly disproportionate. For all these reasons, I'm glad to be here today before you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. Mr. Martin, if you'll use one of the microphones.
Just a mile or two from here, there's a meeting room for the lawyers to meet with their clients in the jail, the D.C. jail here. And the room is nondescript. You know, it looks like half of our grammar schools growing up with cinder blocks and plain walls, heavy door. And you go in that room, plastic chairs, and everything about it is ordinary. And nothing about what's happened to these defendants is ordinary. And I sit before you with gratitude because, as you said, Congressman Gaetz, being a force multiplier on talking about what happened on January 6th, and as importantly, what's happened since then, couldn't be more important, and I salute you for that. But if it were the mistreatments of these J6 defendants, that they're targeted, they're lied about in the press, that prosecutors leak on them, all things you all recognize from your own work. And yet that would and should be a tragedy, but it's coupled with a travesty of the select committee that Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney convened and spent, what, $20 million to go through systematically and to cause damage to the system, not the individuals, the system that we rely on so much. And so thank you. By the way, I didn't, Congressman Gaetz, I represent 3 of the defendants also as an attorney and that are in the jail here. And I'm on the board of one of the organizations, the Patriot Freedom Project, that tries to help the families. And it's how I know so many of these witnesses that are extraordinary today. So thank you for this. And broadly speaking, my testimony, which I'll summarize and cover a few points, overlaps with some of my colleagues up here, but it is this. It's that the system that we rely on and the due process that's at the heart of America has been denied to the individuals here. And when I say that, it's not due process being denied. It's not an assertion. It's a description of corruption in the system. And so as we go through this, things like speedy trial delayed. I've been on the calls with the judges where one after another, the speedy trial is told, the calendar that should move it along is told for good reasons, except that the reasons are created by the system that has caused delays based on evidence, based on videos. The leaking, by the way, of the prosecutors and others about individuals, about their personalities, their families, has been not just mean and unkind, terribly nasty, it's also impacted the juries. And we see it. If you go into those courts, you see it. And you wonder why the legal system, the judges, hasn't addressed it. You wonder how they could say over and over again that the people should suffer through this when our system doesn't expect that. Again, if the select committee, back to the select committee for a moment, if their conduct was only detrimental to the politicians or politics or even the individuals, it would be one thing. That at this panel with candor, defamation, slander, being mean or terrible, we don't want it to be what we see out of our Congress. But this conduct is different, though. That select committee had an impact not only on the jury pool, but on the judges. If you can get a lawyer in that system that practices in the district courts in D.C. to be honest with you, even the liberals, they'll say they've never seen this happen like this. They've never seen a dynamic where the judges and others act like this. In my testimony, I want to highlight 5 areas just to bring light to it. I'm happy to expound on this in other places, but the improper charging alluded to by General Clark, the Department of Justice. People that should have been dealt with as if they vandalized a car at a football game or trespassed on property at a school were charged with all those misdemeanors, and then they added a charge called obstruction of official proceeding. This charge was created by Andrew Weissman and his crew 15 or 20 years ago and managed by Lisa Monica and her crew, and added as a way to say, and our witnesses can tell you about it, well, you're charged with a misdemeanor, oh, and a felony, 20 years in jail. It's absolutely improper. It's never been charged. It was never intended for a proceeding that was gavelled in or gavelled out. It was witness tampering. It's a lie by the DOJ in federal court, and they don't address it. Targeting American citizens as terrorists instead of protesters. All of these men, mostly men, that stayed in jail for years before trial, did so because they said it was an armed insurrection, not a protest. If it was a protest, they'd all go home and prepare their defense. Instead, they stayed in a terrible prison. You all know that, and Marjorie Taylor Greene, the Congresswoman, has particularly shown a light, as did your former colleague, Louis Gohmert. The D.C. juries are not impartial. It's so blatant and brazen that as the court ends, the juror goes out and is interviewed on C-SPAN by Brian Lamb, and she says, I knew what it all meant. I decided to tell my fellow jurors what it all meant, and she clearly, in the interview, didn't understand the law. Nothing.
Mr. Barton, your time's expired. Okay. We'll be back to you with questions, I'm sure, to probe those matters in greater detail. Ms. Perno, you're recognized.
On the 25th of February, 2022, my nephew, Matthew Lawrence Perna, went into his garage, placed a rope around his neck, and hanged himself. He was 37 years old, broken and close to unrecognizable. Matt had stopped going out, stopped sleeping, stopped eating, and was vomiting blood. We are a remarkably close family, and we did everything we could, but it wasn't enough. I will let Matt tell you why, in his own words, from a note he wrote on the worst day of his life. I sacrificed my freedom when I entered into the Capitol building on January 6th, and in despair, took my own life the night that I wrote this. Signed, Matthew Perna. My nephew was extraordinary. He was honest and strong, and defined by his love of all people. He should have never been pushed to the point of despair. He had no intention of going into the Capitol when he traveled to D.C. In his mind, he was standing up for all of us. Matt believed we are still entitled to free speech in the United States of America and did not think expressing it would cost him his life. He wanted to witness history and record it for his growing following on social media. Matt had never been in trouble in his life. The doors he went through had already been opened. Video has confirmed this. Congress has been out of session for almost an hour at that point. He did not touch, break, or steal anything and stayed within the velvet ropes, taking pictures and recording. These 14 minutes cost him everything. For the people who drove my nephew to kill himself, that was long enough to go after his reputation, his freedom, his business, his social media presence, his standing in the small community that had always been his home, his joy, his love of life, everything. What followed was one betrayal after another. From the moment Matt found out the FBI was looking for him, he turned himself in. The agents said it would make it easier for him. That was a lie. He was told his clean record would count in his favor. It did not. He was told that having no affiliation with any organized group would help. That was another lie. Then he was told that he would most likely face a fine and nothing else. Not true either. His attorney said his sentence would be less if he made a deal and pled guilty to all charges. That was perhaps the greatest lie of all. In fact, that deal was a trap, and the terms meant nothing to the DOJ, because after Matt pled guilty, the prosecutor decided to present a sentencing enhancement of terrorism, which could have meant many, many years behind bars, as compared to the 6 to 12 months that he was originally told. We all have a breaking point, and that was Matt's. Do not make the mistake of thinking that my nephew was weak. Nothing could be further from the truth. Matt could run a 35K marathon barefoot, finishing on torn, bleeding skin, pushing through the pain. But a life in prison was unimaginable to him. On the phone, he was inconsolable, stuttering, and could barely form a complete sentence. The fear in his voice was heartbreaking. I told him that I loved him and that we would get through this. He told me that he loved me and thanked me for everything. I did not know that would be our last conversation. Matt had a deep faith in God, and though he prayed every day and sought help, no one could tell him when this nightmare would end, and that made everything worse. He had struggled from the start to live with shame and the damage to his beloved family and many friends, caused not by guilt, but those criminalizing the First Amendment. Dishonest, inaccurate reporting and the false J6 narrative in local and national news cast Matt as a violent domestic terrorist. It was a campaign of lies, death threats, and cruel accusations, and it pushed him to the edge. The flames of deceit shattered friendships and close relationships, and everyone around him suffered. I am only standing before this committee because my nephew hanged himself, and I am outraged. Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene co-sponsored the Matthew Lawrence Perna Act of 2022 when former Congressman Louis Gohmert submitted it. She is the only person who co-sponsored it and has been the most vocal among her peers about the unjust treatment of the January 6ers. Recently, she called for the impeachment of Matthew Graves, who is just one of the many responsible for mentally torturing my nephew to the point of taking his own life. Ms. Greene has been my greatest support, and I am extremely grateful for her fearlessness. This bill could save someone in the future from a total overreach of power by our Justice Department. I ask you to bring this bill to the table and encourage your constituents to pass it. Please, I ask you, do not let my nephew's death be in vain. Matthew's funeral was attended by people from all over the country who had never met him. His online guest book received over 1,000 entries representing 13 countries and 45 states. But disappointingly, not even one sympathy message from anyone in Congress or the Department of Justice. How could strangers from Australia, Taiwan, and Antarctica have sent condolences while many in Congress have yet to hear his name? Since Matthew's death, 3 people have contacted me through social media. All 3 told me about a neighbor or a friend that found their picture on the FBI website for January 6th. Rather than waiting to be raided in their homes or turn themselves in, all 3 shot themselves in the head. How many more are there? We are never going to know. My amazing nephew, Matthew Lawrence Perna, left behind a father and a brother who are beyond devastated. Our family struggles every day, knowing that he died at at the hands of our own Justice Department. We have become a country I no longer recognize. Our citizens have quickly been conditioned to fear speaking out for their beliefs. This needs to end. Nothing I do will ever bring Matthew Perna back. I have absolutely nothing to gain by being here today, but I will spend the rest of my life ensuring that he is never forgotten. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here today. Mr. Strachan, you're recognized.
First of all, thank you so much for holding this hearing. My name is Brandon Strock. I'm the founder of the Walkway Campaign and the proprietor of the Walkway Social Mobile app. On January 6, 2021, I was in Washington, D.C. as a scheduled speaker for a permitted event on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol. I sat in the front row at the Ellipse that day listening to President Trump speak. It made perfect sense to me when President Trump told the hundreds of thousands of attendees to march peacefully and patriotically to the Capitol, as the event was called the March to Save America, and it was my understanding that the crowd would march to the Capitol and attend the permitted rally to listen to dozens more speakers. As I was approaching the Capitol for my speaking obligation, I began receiving text messages from people around the country, at home watching on television, saying that they were hearing on the news that people were going inside the building. My first thoughts were of the numerous times throughout the years that left-wing protesters have gone inside government buildings to protest. In several instances, left-wing protesters have disrupted government hearings by shouting out and behaving chaotically, and typically the incident ends with protesters being removed and business resuming as normal. After years of attending and producing dozens and dozens of right-wing rallies and events, what I was being told was highly unusual. So I began shooting a video while approaching the Capitol and proceeded to shoot one long continuous video for about 10 minutes. I arrived on the east side Capitol grounds around 2:40 p.m. As I walked up to the Capitol building on the east side, there were zero police officers visible on the east side grounds. What might have been at one time closed barricades were now fully open. The large sidewalk on the east side was fully open and unobstructed. There were thousands of people strewn about all areas of the east side grounds, calmly talking and enjoying each other's company. There were no signs and no people present stating or indicating that people were not allowed to be where they were at the time I arrived. I walked very calmly up to the crowd on the east side steps. In my video, a man is seen shouting down to the people below, "They've opened the doors, we're going in." I continued to the top of the east side steps and filmed a crowd of people for 8 minutes, some of whom were trying to make their way in, most of whom were outside filming, like myself. I never entered the Capitol on January 6th. I never engaged in any violence, vandalism, theft, or destruction. I uploaded the video I'd shot to Twitter, but removed it a few short hours later when I was back in my hotel room and began to see on the television for the first time the images of people breaking windows and engaging in acts of violence. None of that was happening when I was on the east side grounds during the 40 minutes or so that I was present. So I took my video down. However, it had already been copied by left-wing trolls who began reposting it over and over again every day and demanding that the FBI arrest me. 2.5 weeks later, they got their wish. A team of FBI agents raided my home on the morning of Monday, January 25th. I was gotten out of bed and handcuffed and told that I was facing multiple felony charges for what I had done on January 6th. The agents began stripping my apartment of computers, phones, iPads, thumb drives, hard drives, camera equipment, clothing, and more. I was taken to jail, strip searched, given an orange inmate uniform, locked in an 8x8 concrete cell with a metal door, and told that I was being placed in 23-hour lockdown. I was released from jail Wednesday morning later that week. Upon my release, I learned that I was being charged with 2 felonies and a misdemeanor, and threatened to be charged with the obstruction of an official proceeding felony in addition, which the prosecutor was sure to tell us carries the possibility of a 20-year prison sentence. Interestingly, one of my felony charges was occupying restricted grounds. The majority of people who entered the Capitol were being given misdemeanor occupying restricted building charges. I was being given a felony for being outside of the building. I was also charged with another felony because the FBI initially alleged that I shouted out to encourage the crowd to impede law enforcement. I was also charged with a misdemeanor for disorderly conduct with an intent to disrupt a hearing before Congress. The news of my arrest and the allegations around me, which I had no opportunity whatsoever to defend myself against, spread internationally during the days when I was in jail. The media reported, as a matter of fact, that I went to the Capitol to help attack police officers and to encourage violence and mayhem at the Capitol. When I was released from jail, I went back to my apartment and found a letter taped to my door saying that my building was terminating my month-to-month lease due to the media coverage and that I had 30 days to vacate the building. 7 days later, I received a letter in the mail from the government telling me that my TSA pre-check status was revoked and that I was no longer considered a low-risk traveler. Over the course of the next several weeks, I received notice that I am permanently banned by PayPal, Venmo, Stripe, and Patreon. My organization's Walkaway Foundation and Walkaway Campaign PAC were also permanently banned from using these payment processors and additionally banned from our donor portals. Both of my organizations and I were banned from our email service, MailChimp. So we moved to Constant Contact, who took our account for a short time, then also banned us after numerous left-wing instigators contacted them to tell them that I was a violent insurrectionist using their platforms to raise money for political violence.
Mr. Straka, that's the end of your time, but I think we'll get back to you for questions, if that's all right. Ms. McAbee?
Thank you for making this possible. In light of recent discoveries surrounding the January 6, 2021 incident in Washington, D.C., I am compelled to bring attention to the violation and denial of basic rights experienced by individuals involved in this event, including my husband, Ronald Colton McAbee, who served as a law enforcement officer for 7 years. On August 17, 2021, our home was raided by the FBI, resulting in seizure of several items, including our front porch flag. Since then, Colton has been moved 7 times. Facing the unsettling reality of being in 6 different facilities. There have been instances when even his own family was unaware of his whereabouts for up to 5 days. He has endured prolonged periods of 24-hour solitary confinement lasting up to 7 days without access to basic necessities such as a shower. Unfortunately, these circumstances are not unique to Colton, but are a rather common experience shared by the January 6 defendants. As a result, their fundamental American, human, and God-given rights have been denied. Over a span of 2 years, these defendants have endured unjust treatment, including extended periods of time of solitary confinement, denial of haircuts, religious services, and visitation rights, both in person and video. It took 597 days before I was granted a mere 30-minute visit with Colton, conducted behind glass. These examples exemplify the systematic denial of their basic rights, which stands in stark contrast to the principles we hold dear as Americans. On September 5, 2022, Colton was subjected to a violent assault by Lieutenant Crystal Lancaster in the D.C. jail. The assault involved the unwarranted deployment of an entire can of OC spray sprayed directly in his face. The guards then proceeded to handcuff him, forcibly throw him on the ground, and deploy additional OC spray. This excessive use of force stemmed from Colton's failure to wear a COVID mask while walking to the medication cart. Following the assault, he was subjected to a scalding shower and forced to wear the same jumpsuit that had been contaminated with the OC spray. Colton, along with Ryan Nichols, Ronald Sandlin, and Barton Shively, were isolated in cells devoid of CCTV surveillance. Astonishingly, Colton was left in the contaminated jumpsuit for 12 hours, allowing the chemicals to reactivate before he received proper medical attention. I would be remiss if I didn't mention that Barton Shively, a Marine veteran battling non-Hodgkin's lymphoma contracted at Camp Lejeune, is to be released soon with no place to go. During the events of January 6, Colton acted heroically to aid an officer in distress and try to save Roseanne Boylan's life. However, during his bond hearing, Judge Emmett Sullivan opted not to review the audio evidence and instead accepted the government's narration. Had the audio been considered, it would have revealed Colton's pleas to the officers, offering his assistance. He also employed the officers to cease their actions, and that, in my opinion, resulted in the tragic loss of Roseanne Boylan's life. Ironically, due to those actions, Colton finds himself languishing behind bars, awaiting trial for a period exceeding 25 months. Regrettably, this is not an isolated case, as January 6 defendants have been systematically denied a jury of their peers, access to crucial evidence, the right to present witnesses, and the right to be tried separately from co-defendants. Today, I implore you to recognize the overreach of government authority and the lack of transparency within the judicial process surrounding these cases. As members of Congress and your staff, you play a crucial role in upholding the principles of justice and accountability. According to 18 U.S. Code Section 4, it is a legal requirement that anyone who has knowledge of a felony committed within the jurisdiction of the United States must promptly disclose. Failure to do so may result in fines, imprisonment for a maximum of 3 years, or both. Today, I want to officially state that I am reporting the deaths of Ashley Babbitt, Roseanne Boylan, Kevin Greason, and Benjamin Phillips. It is crucial that these deaths are thoroughly investigated to ensure justice is served. I implore you to not remain passive observers, but to hold those responsible for these injustices accountable. It is imperative that we restore faith in our justice system and safeguard the rights of all individuals involved in January 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Strand, you're recognized.
Our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. Martin Luther King, Jr. Hello, my name is John Strand, and despite my supposedly First Amendment protected speech on social media, where I have voiced concerns with the legitimacy of the 2020 election, I nevertheless did not travel to Washington, D.C. in January of 2021 for the purpose of protesting at the Capitol. Although I openly supported those protesters who remained peaceful, I personally was present in my official capacity as the security detail for Dr. Simone Gold, who was a scheduled speaker alongside Representatives Paul Gosar, Lauren Boebert, and many others at a rally with a government-approved permit for the northeast corner outside the Capitol. I had no plans with anyone else that day. I never engaged in any action outside of my responsibility to protect my client, who herself did not knowingly engage in any violent or unlawful act and had no intention of anything beyond fulfilling her obligation of giving a speech. To reiterate, neither my client nor myself had any criminal intent, nor did we ever engage in any criminal act that we had present knowledge to be unlawful. Also, the fact that my client was illegally coerced into accepting a fraudulent plea does not, in any way whatsoever, negate these facts. I refused to take a plea because the government's statement of fact in that plea was nefariously false, and because I was not guilty of any criminal intent. But I was convicted by an openly prejudiced D.C. jury, and I was recently sentenced to nearly 3 years in prison and another 3 years probation by a judge who explicitly stated from the bench that his punishment was intensified by his resentment of my public criticisms of the government. 6 more years of my life ruined after 2.5 years of brutal government and ensuing public persecution, all because I protected a woman in a crowd. This is an unmitigated travesty of justice. I'll briefly outline 4 key points of grave concern. Number 1, the American rule of law dictates that each individual must be held accountable for their specific actions. It is abhorrent and anti-American to conflate and criminalize a single individual with the acts of another. And in fact, the protesters charged in the 2017 presidential inauguration riot were acquitted precisely because the prosecutors only associated them with the specific criminal acts of others without evidence proving criminal activity by those individuals being charged. Yet, this is exactly what the DOJ has done to me and hundreds of other J6 defendants with a 100% conviction rate. They are openly punishing individuals for merely being present at a political protest. Number 2, America's survival as a constitutional republic depends upon the inalienable right of free speech. President George Washington said, quote, "For if men are to be precluded from offering their sentiments on a matter, that would suggest the idea that reason is of no use to us, and then the freedom of speech may be taken away, and dumb and silent we may be led like sheep to the slaughter." The DOJ's dishonest distortions of my free speech to frame me as a criminal and mislead a jury have led to my wrongful conviction of serious crimes. And a DC judge's fury at my public criticism of the government's behavior has landed me years in prison. That is the textbook definition of fascism. This is the slaughter George Washington warned of, and it should horrify everyone. Number 3, the Equal Protection Clause and due process guarantees of the 4th and 14th Amendments prohibit selective prosecution. I ask you, how does a premeditated protest action occur during an active session of Congress, explicitly for the purpose of disrupting that congressional proceeding, and yet those protesters are legally excused and publicly praised? This happened in 2017. It was excused and praised because those protesters supported the agenda of the left. Countless examples of left-wing protests nearly always end with charges dropped and bail funds raised by Democrat politicians who aggressively and publicly support such protests, regardless of the violence frequently incurred. If you cannot see the harshly stark contrast of the unprecedented persecution inflicted on so many J6 defendants, then you are willfully and shamefully blind. And number 4, vertical overcharging is illegal, and the bastardization of Title 18 U.S. Code 1512 requires Congress to act because the executive branch's DOJ and the judiciary are violating legislative intent. clearly abusing a statute that was written 40 years ago to punish persons who tamper with witnesses or shred documents in an effort to destroy evidence. It's never been used this way before until now against protesters for J6. The DOJ has only grasped this non-germane statute in order to wield its 20-year prison penalty as leverage to ensure the immediate compliance of most defendants with their fraudulent plea deals. The misapplication and weaponization of this law against political protest is literally extremely dangerous to our democracy. January 6 is fraught with alarming evidence of government instigation and involvement, government cover-up, and government fraud. And J6 has brought an open subversion of the rule of law and a trampling of the Constitution. These mounting violations of our civil rights are an unprecedented abuse of power against the American people. It must end, or our republic will be lost. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Dr. Gosar, you're recognized for questions.
Thank you very much, Matt. First, I'd like to say to all of you my condolences. Matt, Ms. Perna, I just empathize with you. And I got to tell you, Mickey, you know how I feel about Ashley. I'm going to come to you, Mr. Clark. Who's in charge of Washington, D.C.?
Well, Muriel Bowser is the mayor, and there's a city council, and there's a home rule statute that Congress passed.
So it would be Congress, right?
It's Congress is the ultimate backstop and control
who
over
at the time was
that.
Speaker?
I'm sorry?
Who at the time was Speaker?
Nancy Pelosi.
And does that Speaker have jurisdiction over the safety and welfare of anything in the Capitol?
Yes, the relevant committee, as I've researched it in the past, functionally reports to her.
How does a small little paragraph that was put in the NDA years ago that allows the federal government to incarcerate an American citizen without cause for any due reason, how does that affect this case?
I'm not sure I know the answer to that, Congressman, to be honest.
Well, I think it played a big part because it allows the government to detain somebody without real merit. And that was placed into an NDA bill and is still part of the process. Did Nancy Pelosi have advance warning in regards to intelligence that there was probably things happening?
My understanding is yes, Congressman. There were reports from Secret Service agents. There were DHS reports that have gotten a lot of coverage. There's a lot of advance intelligence. And indeed, there's a remarkable story that I don't think has gotten enough press in Newsweek, published on about the one-year anniversary of January 6th, which indicated that there were tactical teams, sort of the most highly trained and elite units like the hostage rescue team. They were sent to the Capitol in advance because of all of these reports by the Justice Department, by the Attorney General, the acting Attorney General, Jeff Rosen, acting individually without apparently really in a lot of coordination. It's puzzling actually why you would do that and you wouldn't have a harder security perimeter if you had those teams there on the outside to stop people from coming in the first place.
So when you look at 16 versus 20, was there a bigger presence on 16 versus 20?
It looks to me like things were locked down in 20 around the Capitol. I mean, there were those famous fences. I've seen the pictures. It looks like a military zone. It's not the kind of thing I expect in America. It reminded me actually of the time when I was in law school, you could drive past the White House. And now, that's been locked down apparently due to terrorist threats. But I thought what happened with the Capitol after, the last, in connection with the last presidential election for the inauguration was true overreach and overreaction.
So Ms. Pelosi had the ability to take that information and put it to good work, but she turned down National Guard and additional Capitol Police, did she not?
Yes, she turned it down, and Muriel Bowser, the mayor, turned it down as well.
And who did she have a meeting with in regards to the military?
I'm not recalling precisely who she met with. General Milley.
General Milley made some incriminating comments.
You've reminded me of that. Yes, I remember.
Can you expound on that?
Well, I mean, it seemed to me that General Milley was engaged in conduct that is shocking. I mean, him coming, his commander-in-chief was Donald Trump at the time. He is coming and basically indicating that, he's willing to work with Pelosi to engage as a safeguard against Donald Trump. And we know, even though the second impeachment against Donald Trump tried to cut short what his speech was and present it as if he was urging people to violently attack the Capitol, that he actually told people to march peacefully and patriotically. So General Milley had to have been aware of all of that and been aware of what was being said in internal meetings, and yet he pretended as if Donald Trump was some kind of threat, Congressman.
So let me ask you this. Ms. Pelosi made this comment, that President Trump has a right to a trial to prove his innocence. This is exactly what's transpired with anybody that was arrested on J6.
This is an inversion of our system, right? We have a presumption of innocence. And indeed, I heard this from Benny Thompson, who we've talked about as the chair of this wayward and lawless January 6th Select Committee. After because I realized that they were, lining me up as one target in their hearings, I refused. I had initially refused based on executive privilege, which I was instructed to take and invoke, on law enforcement privilege, which the Justice Department instructed me to invoke, on lawyer-client privilege, you name it. The January 6th committee rejected it. I could see where they were headed, so I took the Fifth Amendment privilege, which the innocent under Supreme Court case law are entitled to take as well. Benny didn't stop Benny Thompson, the chairman. He went on MSNBC with Rachel Maddow, and he said that if you take the Fifth Amendment, that's part and parcel of being guilty. So this is the mindset of these folks that we face. I think that Benny Thompson and Nancy Pelosi are of a piece.
So I'm going to leave with one last comment. Pictures are worth 1,000 words. Somebody made the comment that this was acts against democracy, and that would be against the people. So to me, it seems like we ought to turn the people loose in regards to all videos being accessible to all members of the United States, and to help us find those people undercover, whether it be Antifa, FBI, whatever. That's the only way we're going to get to the bottom of this. Thank you.
Mr. Norman.
First of all, I just want to thank you for y'all for testifying. I know Sarah came to the office, Ashley's mom, and others. This is heartbreaking, particularly Jerry with your nephew and the way y'all have been treated. It's interesting that there was a police officer, and I'm from South Carolina, who came to the Capitol, and he's a 25-year Marine, been around a long time. He sensed something was wrong, and he left. Because he said something's just not right. The gathering that took place where it was people that turned their hat around, they were 50 to 100 of them. The picture of Ray Epps letting people in, where's the arrest for him? The lady I met at a conference who I just was sitting beside her from South Georgia who had 10 FBI agents show up. And said they were going to arrest her. She said, for what? They said, you were in the Capitol. Show me evidence. They had taken when they showed the picture, it was the hotel she stayed in. It was not the Capitol. It had a rendering like it. This was in South Georgia. So all that is just, this is what happens in third world countries. This is not supposed to happen in America. I want to thank you for having a voice and not being quiet. And for coming here. It's not easy, I know, for those who, it's just unjust. It's not right. And Matt, I want to thank you for putting this on. Congressman Gaetz has been on this from the day that it happened. Going forward, the tapes have not been released. We've heard a lot of different ideas as to why, or excuses. The people are being arrested as we speak. What is from a legal standpoint, what is your opinion? What should we do as congressmen? And what's your take? But really, either one of you.
So, Congressman, I think that what I would recommend is that you proceed stepwise. I think the most urgent need is that every single one of the defense counsel and every single one of the defendants, they need to be given access to the entirety of that video record, because they need to try to find any Brady material in there. I think that the system in which overzealous prosecutors they will screen it for you and they'll tell you what they think is exculpatory. With all due respect, I think it's defense lawyers who need to be able to look at that kind of material and then decide what they think is exculpatory so that they can design appropriate defenses for their clients. As to public release, initially I had the view that all of it should be put out so that it could be crowdsourced, much like WikiLeaks revelations were. But I do recognize what I've seen Julie Kelly say to the media and in print, which is that there's these nefarious organizations like the ones that were threatening some of the witnesses here today with these Saul Alinsky-like tactics, the sedition hunters. So I recognize that there is a valid concern about not putting it out in that way. So that's why I would recommend the stepwise process. Make sure that all of the information gets to defense counsel. That's the most urgent thing.
Congressman Norman, I represent 3 of the guys, right? So it's for everybody that's, you may know it, but there is a system of looking at the video evidence that the DOJ has made available to defense lawyers and to the individuals. It's burdensome, it's unfair, it's terrible, it's nasty, it's terrible. It's hard work. And then Congressman Loudermilk and his team have made it available to people that asked. I've looked at it. I've gone in and looked at the video myself, Tucker Carlson, Julie Kelly, et cetera. It's very hard to do. I've sat in there for hours. You can turn it up to times 40 and you're trying to watch this thing whip past you, right? And they've been great. I give their staff a lot of encouragement. But I differ with the general here. I think at a certain point, the sedition hunters are going to find us anyway. Pelosi already gave the tapes to everybody anyway, or the FBI will give it to them tomorrow. So at this point, we don't need 44,000, but there's 10,000 hours that would reveal what went on. I sat and watched the pipe bomber. We haven't even mentioned the pipe bomber. The 2 major political parties, we're told, faced hot bombs that didn't go off the hour after they were set, the night of January 5th, and somehow were discovered the next day. Hot bombs. They say they were real bombs. The ATF told us that. You go on there and you can watch the videos. You can see the pipe bomber. The FBI's lying. The pipe bomber didn't. I don't think they went to Virginia. There's a car behind another car on C Street next to the Capitol Hill Club. The bomber goes in and out of the car. No one's talked about it. You can go look at it yourselves. It's marked. We tagged it. My point is we need more eyes on this so that more people can find out who was there. Congressman Sessions has asked DOJ in his capacity on one of the committees to tell us who the undercover agents and agents are. They're refusing. You guys know that. So let's let it out there and let's let the public figure out who the people are, and we'll know every Ray Epps from here to Long Beach, California and back, and justice will be served because they won't stop if they can keep hiding. If they can keep hiding, we'll never know who did what.
I yield back.
Thank you. I'm going to recognize myself for questions. Mr. Straka, you were describing some of the blacklisting that you encountered in your life following these events. Can you elaborate on that?
Sure. Do you want me to go back to the statement or just?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Well, where I'd left off, I'd said that I'd been permanently banned by PayPal, Venmo, Stripe, Patreon, my donor. And I was in D.C. on January 6th as a private citizen, not on behalf of any of my organizations. Nonetheless, my organization, the Walkaway Foundation, and the Walkaway Campaign PAC, both were permanently banned by PayPal and Stripe and a number of payment processors as well as donor portals. We were first banned by MailChimp as an email service because it was said that we were using the email service to send and receive emails about planning violence or fundraising for political violence. Constant Contact then banned us, and after that we were banned by 4 more email services, including SendLane and MailerLite.
Let me stop you there.
Sure.
We have developed evidence indicating that Bank of America turned over all of their records regarding anyone who bought a cup of coffee in Washington, D.C. on January 6th. I want to know what your perspective is on that, on the fact that such a large private company would, of their own volition, turn over so much stuff and seemingly violate people's privacy.
Well, I think it's horrifying, and obviously I think that there was an attempt here to try to understand who's funding whom. Certainly there was an interest in who gives to my organization, things like that. I'm personal friends since January 6th with a fellow J6 defendant named Derek Evans, who's running for Congress in West Virginia. A major bank told him that they were canceling his bank mortgage and that he had 30 days to find a new bank to finance his bank mortgage. I mean, while going through the most high-profile criminal case in American history.
Does January 6th open the door to the need for the Congress to look at legal reforms so that we don't see people of any political stripe barred from the financial world by virtue of their nonviolent politics?
I mean, somehow we, the defendants of January 6th, need to be able to have some sort of a voice. I mean, even I am probably one of the most high-profile people who was arrested in conjunction with January 6th. Nonetheless, I felt like it was a David versus Goliath situation. I mean, I could not keep up with the amount of banning and cancellation and payment processors, email services, donor portals. The government put me on a terrorism watch list along with every other J6er. We all have a designation of what's called Quad S. So when we go to the airport now, we have to go through hours of special screening. It's literally TSA told me this is the highest level terrorism list you can be on and still be allowed to fly. They follow you around the airport with teams of agents. Sometimes they have dogs. They station themselves all around you at the gate. They bring special equipment and swab every item in your bag for explosive materials, your hands, your feet, stick their hand down your pants doing pat-downs. They do all of this in front of the other passengers multiple times when you're flying. People with misdemeanor charges, misdemeanor disorderly conduct charges.
Well, this is very helpful because during the appropriations process, we can put riders to prohibit the use of funds on some of the things that would seemingly violate people's due process. Mr. Strand, I wanted your advice on a legislative concept I've been talking about with some of my colleagues, and it's on the matter of venue, because we've seen a number of defendants drug into the jurisdiction of Washington, D.C., and then they face a different jury dynamic than they would otherwise face elsewhere in the country. What would be your advice to the Congress about looking at some venue reform to give defendants the ability to face these charges where they're from?
Well, thank you, Congressman, and I couldn't stress the importance of that more. I'm going to take it back from the future and say, right now, I'm about to go to prison for almost 3 years. I did nothing wrong. And the only reason that happened, not the only reason, but the main reason it happened so easily is because I was denied the constitutional guarantee of a fair trial by a jury of my peers. Not only that, but my sentence was worsened by a judge who explicitly said from the bench on the record, read the transcript, that he was furious at me for criticizing the government publicly. Specifically, he was furious at me for making the claim, which is my First Amendment protected right to do, but the evidence bears it out, that Washington, D.C. juries are entirely biased, flagrantly so. If I could tell the short story of my experience during my 8-day trial, the most interesting part was day one, which was jury selection. And this was not a random assortment of citizens fulfilling their civic duty to participate in a jury trial. These were people that were hanging on every moment, hoping to get chosen so that they could experience the personal gratification of crucifying someone that they politically despise. They openly admit this.
Very important, that venue issue. Mr. Clark, I have a question for you specifically. Do you believe you were framed by the January 6th Select Committee?
Oh, absolutely, Congressman, I do. I think that, I was the only person at the Justice Department, at a significant level, Senate confirmed spot, who was interested in investigating the election.
Well, I know that to be the case, Mr. Clark, and the reason I know that to be the case, and I'm glad I get to say it here in a public forum, is because I became aware of evidence that U.S. attorneys were developing, showcasing fraud in the election. And perhaps that evidence would lead nowhere, perhaps it would lead to the crime of the century, but it should not have been squelched. And Bill Barr was suppressing evidence and stopping it from being developed that showcased irregularities, and not just irregularities, fraud, where people were fraudulently requesting those ballots. And I told my friend Scott Perry that on the floor, that I was aware of that evidence. And now I believe we see you and we see our colleague Scott Perry unfairly targeted, and I want you and the world to know that if you had a willingness to stop the U.S. Department of Justice from rat-holing cases and squirreling away information, that would have been helpful to learn on that day. You were acting your patriotic duty to do so, and I am deeply ashamed as a member of this government, particularly at the way you've been treated. At this time, I'd like to recognize Ms. Greene for 5 minutes, and we may ask an accommodation of some of our panelists. Ms. Greene has invited a guest here that she would like to question, who may be behind Ms. Perna, so we may have to do a quick musical chairs. Ms. Greene, you're recognized.
Yeah, thank you very much. And first of all, I'd like to thank each of you for being here. And it's so heavy on my heart that we're doing this today when President Trump is being arraigned, all because of the weaponized government that's been weaponized against each of you. And it all started on the day on January 6th when we were just doing our constitutional duty to object to Joe Biden's fraudulent electoral college votes, because we all believed that the election had been stolen. And I can't believe that we're here talking about this, but first I'd like to express my deepest sympathy for each of you and all the pain and suffering that you've all had to go through because of this government. And it's wrong. And I can tell you right now, there's many of us that have vowed we're doing everything we can to defund the Department of Justice, to defund the FBI, and to fight the weaponized government. But I want to explain also the serious situation that we are all in. We have no control over the Department of Justice right now. We have no control over the FBI because we do not control the White House. And that means that everything from January 6 tapes, if they were to get out, and I support releasing them, I've said it all along, but if they do get out, sedition hunters will come. And I know that everybody can look at it and say, we all know who everyone is now, but at the same time, that means that the Department of Justice will be coming after more people. I don't want to see anyone end up like Matthew Perna. I do not want to see anyone end up like Matthew Perna, Jerry. That's too much. I don't want to see anyone end up like you, Brandon. I don't want to see anyone go through what your family's going through. John, I don't want to see you go to jail. I don't want to see it, and I don't want to see this happen to any more people because of sick, evil people that believe that they have to hunt people down using facial recognition software and go after more people. I don't want to see that. It's too much. And I would like to, Taylor Hanson is here today, and if someone would mind letting him sit in. Taylor, could you give just a brief bio about yourself? And I invited Taylor here today because Taylor's an eyewitness and videoed Ashley Babbitt's murder. And I invited him here today because I wanted him to be able to talk about it.
First off, thank you guys for having me. Thank you guys for having me now that the button works. My name is Taylor Hanson. I'm an independent journalist and field reporter. I was there on January 6th to document what I believe was going to be left-wing violence due to the constant pattern of the MAGA Million March and people being violently attacked by left-wing organizations. So I showed up to the Capitol. I was at the Ellipse, and the next thing I knew, I overheard a group. This is around, I want to say 12:20, talking about, hey, we're going to form a group. We're going to the Capitol early. We're going to march in a few minutes. So I thought that was kind of suspicious, and naturally I just followed them. And this group actually ended up being the very first group to breach the initial barriers. This group had Ray Epps in it, had Ryan Samsel in it, amongst many other people. And after those first initial barriers were actually breached, there was almost, I would say, about 10 to 15 minutes of people just gathering, in this area. And when you're behind, you couldn't even tell what was going on. You're 100 people behind, you can't tell what's going on right in front of you. So there's just this surge of people continuously pushing in. And I'm at the very front, and I can see this. Everybody's being peaceful at this moment. And that's when, as the crowd forms, people are singing the national anthem, people are being patriotic, they're doing their due rights and protesting, doing their First Amendment rights. And
Can I pause you for 1 second? Was President Trump still speaking at the Ellipse at this time?
By the time the Capitol was breached, Trump was still speaking, yes.
Okay. I'm sorry. You can continue.
And that's when the first concussion grenade flew over my head and deep into the crowd. And I noticed this hit children that were in the crowd, it hit elderly people, it hit women. And at that moment, the tone completely changed. It was a complete 180. And I've covered, all the 2020 riots. I was on the ground consistently. I have still to this day never seen a reaction of law enforcement like they did that day. I would say that they did start it. That's not a common reoccurrence from what I've seen at these riots or these protests. And that first initial grenade went by, and then it was just a barrage of grenades. I lost count. I had to put people out that were on fire. People had holes in their cheeks from rubber munitions that weren't being violent. They were standing back. And that's when the initial crowd was pushed even farther from the crowd surge. A man named Derek Vargo was pushed off the side of the ledge as he was going up the wall. And that caused almost a stampede of sorts. We went up the stairs. I recall going up the stairs with everybody, and there was these double doors that were wide open, and people were just flowing in. There was 3 cops in sight as I arrived to the top of the Capitol. They were directly to the right of me. I entered in the west wing door, and they were just standing around. They were drinking water, handing out water bottles to people, to protesters, actually. And, I remember going into the Capitol, walking down the hallway. Everybody's chanting, "Stop the steal," no violence yet. I haven't seen pretty much anything. And
Except violence from
violence from the police. And I had seen people fighting back, and you did have the occasional person in the crowd with a gas mask that was unidentifiable. I actually have a video of someone that I recognize from my time reporting in Portland, Oregon, that is affiliated with Antifa.
What is his name?
Press. I don't have her identity,
Okay.
But I recognized her, and I said, "Oh, hey, you're from Portland. I recognize you." And this is all on video, and she nods her head and then kind of brushes me off and hurry and runs. And then she's later seen setting up what seems to be a shot of one of her other friends that was there also committing violence against the police.
And let me ask you another. Okay, just a little further. You covered all the Antifa and BLM riots across the country. Was Antifa in the crowd that day? And could you speak to their involvement? Can we just go a little longer for this?
Yeah, they were unequivocally, without a doubt, in the crowd that day. You have multiple of them that are based in D.C. and Portland that all talked about it on Twitter, about how they were there and nothing is going to happen to them, essentially.
And there's evidence of this?
Yeah, there's evidence of this.
There's video evidence, social media posts?
There's social media posts. That's where the majority of them were posted to, was Twitter.
Were you ever questioned by the January 6th committee?
No, I actually reached out multiple occasions, more times than I can count, because I was a witness to what I would argue one of the most significant deaths in American history. I wasn't investigated by MPD, not even interviewed by their homicide team, by the Capitol Police. When the FBI talked to me, they had no interest in what happened to Ashley Babbitt. All they wanted to talk about was John Sullivan and my connection to him, which was, a very peculiar thing, and they tried to set up an in-person meeting with me. And, of course, it wasn't what it was supposed to be. They were trying to entrap me. I had 2 phones hacked and basically completely wiped. And amongst that, the harassment has just been nonstop.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Representative Nels, you're recognized.
Thank you, Matt. Apologize if I'm a little late. I'm in another committee hearing, important business, FAA reauthorization. We all want to have safe flights. I got involved with this real early on. I was in Congress for 3 days. I think, Marjorie, you too. We were in Congress for 3 days when this all took place. It's probably the last member, if not the last member on the House floor that day. I'm an old law enforcement officer for 30 years as a sheriff of a large county for 8 years. So I stood at the back doors, the main back doors leading into the chambers. Had a conversation with an individual on the outside, and anyway. It was a few weeks after that I was approached by then Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy asking me to read the Senate version, the Senate reports, because the Senate had some hearings early on. I think it was in March and April. So Kevin McCarthy approached me and asked me to read all those reports and write a report on what my feelings and my thoughts were because of my extensive law enforcement experience. And I did so. I provided him a 14-page document. And when I looked at the report and the OIG recommendations and everything that I saw, what was wrong that day, January 6th, folks, was a law enforcement failure, an epic law enforcement failure. When Leader McCarthy, now Speaker McCarthy, asked me to be one of the 5 on the January 6th Select Committee, I was honored to be asked to, and then obviously Nancy Pelosi did what nobody else has done as Speaker, rejected Minority Leader's picks to be on a select committee. So we weren't on the committee, and she picked a couple of rhinos that, and that whole committee is all about Donald Trump. Anyway, so when you look at January 6th and you read these special event assessments, because I spent a lot of time on this, and when you look at the December 15th, the December 30th, and the January 3rd special events assessment, we knew that things weren't going to get ugly up here. It was quite clear. We knew that the Capitol itself, they meaning the leadership of the Capitol Police, i.e. an Assistant Chief Pittman, who's no longer here, they had all the intelligence. They had all the intelligence that it was going to get ugly up here. Extremist groups from both sides, white supremacist groups, I mean, high propensity for violence. They knew thousands of people were coming. And it was glaring in that January 3rd report. It was on page 12 out of the 14. And it said things would get stupid. And I believe, me personally, I believe that they hid the intelligence. It's like they wanted this to happen. I say that because you remember Harry Dunn, one of the first officers, he testified, he was one of the four. Harry Dunn's testimony says, he goes, I didn't think it was going to be any different than any other day. Kind of like the big marches they had November and December, relatively nonviolent. He didn't think this was going to be like any other day. And so when you look at the hours and hours of video, you see most of the Capitol police officers don't have any type of shields or stuff. It was the Metropolitan Police that came prepared. But the U.S. Capitol Police, I spent some time and I focused a lot of my time on the shooting of and the killing of Ashley Babbitt. I document this very well. I was probably one of the first. I think, Paul, you said it as well. I believe Ashley Babbitt was murdered that day. Now, you say, well, how could you say that? I said, well, I'm a sheriff. I've had deputies shoot and kill people. I've had my own deputies shot, killed. The point is, I know a little bit about use of force. And what disturbed me about that investigation into Lieutenant Byrd is it never went to a grand jury. You want to have the vote of confidence of the American people. Send every law enforcement shooting, justified, questionable, whatever. Send it to a grand jury. It never went to a grand jury. Most of the people in Capitol Police will even tell you. They'll tell you that, hey, this was a quick investigation. Lieutenant Byrd, and I hope when we have a new president in 2 years, that he goes to a grand jury. That shooting should go to a grand jury. And that's my commitment to you, Ashley, to Ms. Babbitt. If I can do anything, that should go to a grand jury at a minimum. My point is I'm just going to leave you at this. When you look at those special event assessments in that January 3rd, I had an opportunity to talk to then the National Guard commander, and I said to him, I said, General, I said, if you read that report, the National Guard should have been on our nation's capital on January 4th. He agreed with me. If you would have read the report, it justified, the intelligence was there, and General Walker said to me, the National Guard would have been on our nation's capital on January 4th like the intelligence suggested. January 6th would have never happened. So then what happens? We win the House, and where does Miss Pittman go? She's got a nice cushy job now, UC Berkeley, making $300,000, $200,000 a year. Nancy found her a job. Nancy found her a job. Apparently, Matt, I guess she was up here last week for House admin. I don't know, but I wish I had 5 minutes with her, because I'm telling you, if there's one person that to me could have prevented this from taking place, it's Miss Pittman, and she should be held accountable, because it was one of the darkest days in our nation's history. One of the darkest days, and they just sat on the intelligence. Shameful. We can never allow it to happen again. And I'm going to end with this, but Marjorie was talking about everybody, Donald Trump speaking in the ellipse. The first breach that took place at about 1:10 p.m., Donald Trump was still speaking. It was a 22-block walk. It takes you a half hour to walk from, so no. And you see Ray, Mr. Ray, right? Whispering in the guy's ear, boom. And they put bicycle racks. Think about that. Tens of thousands of people coming up. What are we going to have for a perimeter? A damn bicycle rack that couldn't keep your cat in your yard, right? I mean, none of this just made sense. So these are some of the things we wanted to do on that select committee, because I thought I could have exposed them for who they truly are. This is all about Donald Trump coming back in 2024. Shame on them. But the greatest leader in my lifetime, folks, keep the faith. He's coming back.
Thank you very much, Sheriff. Thank you for all of your thought and writing on this subject. We're going to proceed with the second round, and we'll begin with the gentlelady from Georgia on the screen.
Thank you. Jerry, I'm going to talk to you specifically. Yeah. You're the aunt of Matthew Perna, who committed suicide after the agony of finding out that it was going to continue, the harassment, the persecution by the Department of Justice. Was Matthew Graves the prosecutor leading the investigation into your nephew?
Yes.
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 Matthew Perna, for everyone here, if you don't know, I'm sorry, Matthew Graves is the attorney for the Department of Justice that leads the investigation into many of you. And he has the special privilege of being able to prosecute crime here in Washington, D.C., and he's a U.S. attorney that can go after federal cases. He ignores 67% of the arrest here in Washington, D.C., but focuses and harnesses his office and their efforts on people like your nephew, people like you, John, people like you, Brandon, and so many others. And it's shameful. So, Jerry, I'm just going to ask you a few questions. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure you're speaking on behalf of Matthew and all of your family.
Yes.
If Matthew was here today, what do you think he would tell Congress that we need to do? What would he tell Matthew Graves that should happen?
Well, many of the things that he would say are the very things that are in the bill that you co-sponsored. The overreach of power, the change of venue. First of all, the change of venue. Let's look at that one. Because had Matthew been able to even fathom a fair trial, he would never have pled guilty. And that is what's going on with these defendants that are pleading guilty. They really have no choice. They know that they're not going to face a jury of their peers. And so they plead guilty. Why are they subjected to no change of venue? That is such an important aspect here. You wouldn't have the guilty pleas that you are having if they were given a chance at a fair trial. So they plead guilty, and not only are they already guilty in the court of public opinion, now that they pled guilty, they're persecuted even more. Well, he must have done it. And that's what my nephew faced from his community, from the local media, from the national media. Well, he pled guilty. My nephew, when he called me the week that he hanged himself, he said to me on the phone, just sobbing, "Aunt Jerry, I must be guilty. I must be guilty. They're telling me I'm guilty. Everybody thinks I'm guilty." He was at that point where he actually believed it. But had he been given a chance to be fairly heard by a fair trial, he never would have pled guilty because he didn't do anything that deserved several years in prison. Mm-hmm. And I think you need to examine these constitutional rights first. And that's what Matt would say, because Matt believed in the Constitution. He believed in the Justice Department, and he loved the United States. He loved this country. He loved it so much. If you could look at pictures of Matthew from the time he was a baby, I swear to you, 90% of his photographs, he's wearing red, white, and blue. I'm not joking. I can show them to you on my phone. He was fascinated with the American flag, even as a child. He constantly pointed it out, whether it was driving down the road or in a magazine or in a commercial. He loved this country, and this country failed him miserably. And you have to understand that it's not just the January 6ers' lives who are being affected here. Their families, their friends. Matt's father suffers from Parkinson's disease. I cannot tell you how badly he declined after Matt's arrest. I wish you could see him now and see him 2 years ago. He's a different person. The effect is massive. So it is not just the people being arrested. It is their families, their friends. And it is the fear that has been placed in the Americans. Don't speak out. You may end up like a January 6er.
Yeah, that's right. I think that's how most people feel. Most people do feel that way, and it's because of the weaponized government. It's the weaponized government, and that's why we're committed to working everything we can do to stop it. Thank you, Jerry.
Well, thank you, Marjorie. I want to thank you personally for the articles of impeachment for Matthew Graves. I want to thank you for that and your fearlessness. You have been a huge supporter to me and my family. I am the speaker for my family. Matt's father is not capable of getting in front of this committee or any cameras anywhere to talk about his son. We're devastated beyond belief that this happened, but more so because it happened at the hands of our own government.
Yeah, I can't imagine actually. But we haven't done enough because people are still locked up. Their rights are still being abused. People like John face 3 years. Brandon can't get through an airport. I tell you what, you get more security than I get going through an airport, and that's backwards, completely backwards.
Can I add something?
Sure, of course.
When Brandon was talking about his experiences at the airport, I want you to know that it is not just the January 6ers. Matt's father faces absolutely the worst searches at the airport. Matt's girlfriend also. Matt's aunt on his other side of his family. These are people that never, ever faced issues with TSA. And now, every time they travel, they are held up by TSA. My brother's hands are swabbed. He is searched to the point of being embarrassed.
Were they there? Were they in Washington, D.C. on January 6th?
No, they were not, which is the craziest part.
Do they think their names are in the system?
Yes,
are they flagged?
do.
Is this every time they travel through the airport?
My brother was just in the Cleveland airport, the Cleveland airport, and the Denver airport 2 weeks ago. And I asked him if it occurred again. He said, unbelievable. He said, I was humiliated.
What happens? So they go through TSA. Their hands are swabbed. Can you describe some of the things?
They are searched to the point where it's an invasion of privacy, honestly. And my brother, like I said, he walks with a cane. He has Parkinson's disease. And this happens to him every time he goes through an airport. I want him to come down to Florida, and he said, Jerry, I honestly don't want to fly anymore.
Can I ask, does anyone else have family members or know that this happens to their family members that were not? John, that happens to your family members, and they were not in Washington, D.C.? Sarah, you don't know that? Okay. Brandon, yes. Family members, friends that were not in Washington, D.C.?
Nowhere near Washington, D.C. People I've traveled with 10 years ago. This is happening to them, too.
I'll yield back. Sorry. I could talk to everybody all day long. Matt's giving me a hard time.
Dr. Gilstrau's right.
Yeah, so I want to get back to this point because D.C. is special. And it's not in a good way. The Congress has the power of the purse, or we thought we did. We really don't right now. It's divided by the executive branch because they put everything in these national emergencies. So back to you, Mr. Clark. This system here in Washington, D.C., is it conservative or liberal?
It's worse than that. It's radically left.
So on the 0 to 10 scale, you'd probably put it at 15.
Yeah. It's like the movie where the amplifier goes up to 11.
Now, Ed.
Spinal Tap. That's it.
So Ed, this just didn't happen. This has been brewing for quite some time. This justice out of control. We had Benghazi, we had Fast and Furious, Benghazi, the IRS scandal. We had the Russiagate, Ukrainegate, Bidengate, and Obamagate. Is anybody held accountable?
Well, I'm not interested in looking back to accuse, but I think you bring a point that at this point, if the American people don't start to see people held accountable, their frustration is mounting. And this is so obvious to normal people that January 6th is being used to target individuals. It's so obvious. that I think you are really, there's a real need. And this is an opportunity, frankly, for the Republicans in the House to stand up and do this, but it's a real need.
Well, I like the fact that you said it was an opportunity, because I want to go back to those videotapes. A picture's worth 1,000 words, is it?
Correct. Yes.
They're all going to come after us regardless.
Yes, sir.
So it seems to me like we ought to be making this big push and maybe turn the tide. And for example, how about a bounty? Make everybody deputies. And look in those tapes as to people that are undercover. Antifa.
The pipe bomber.
Yeah, absolutely right. And what was the comment about fear? You know, freedoms aren't free. You're going to have to stand up for them. We have tyranny right now in Washington, D.C. We occupy 1/3 of the federal government. And I think that we have to get smart. The videotape's got to come out. We have to employ America.
Right.
And we need to hold people accountable. Maybe we can do that in the budgetary process. Go by the Holman rule, where we go line by line by line. Take somebody's salary down to $1. I've done it. I was the last person to do it with Mark Gabriel. But you're right, time's up. And this is the biggest assault. They used Alinsky's rules for radicals against all of us. Why do they hate Donald Trump? Because he uses the
They've
back.
weaponized those rules into government.
But may I say, Congressman Gosar, as to the video, the DOJ already is using the video to target our people. When they want to, they find Brandon Straka. He's being a little bit kind. He's famous, and they targeted him, clearly. There's all sorts of, and my opinion would be sedition hunters and others, that's an extension of the DOJ in terms of their mindset. On our side, we do need citizen journalists to rise up and say, there's the other Ray Epps. This guy is a cop who's in undercover. You know, we have those reports. We have video that shows people putting on wristbands that we can. In this case, if it is such a travesty, and the left says it is, and we agree, then let's get to the bottom of it. We're not going to do it by waiting for DOJ to form a task force to take it up. It's not going to happen.
Well, we have letters of inquiry. And so for many of you know that I was censored. And what we started doing is doing letters of inquiry, which required the given committee, which is assigned to 10 days where they have to actually do something. And so we went about doing that with Ray Epps and everybody else. So once again, I think there are some tools at our disposal that we can make this thing work. And, you know, they put a light on us. Let's put the light on them. And I think turnabout is fair play. So thank you, Matt, for putting this on. We certainly appreciate you.
I'll recognize myself for my portion of the second round of questions. Mr. Martin, I want to get into some of the violations of people's civil rights and due process. Have you observed those in your work with January 6 defendants?
Certainly, to come to that conclusion is perhaps a longer process, but yes. I mean, clearly the Speedy Trial Act, which requires faster than we've seen. Clearly, I mean, I think the conditions, you know, as soon as the word was out that the Republicans were likely to win the House, they started moving prisoners out of D.C., the D.C. jail, to other places and tried to clean things up because they didn't want the scrutiny, right? So we have very specific instances of a failure for care in the jail that are beyond what we'd expect. But look, I think, and the general is more qualified than I am to understand DOJ, but the system in terms of violations, due process, the Brady violations, you can't really get to everything that's exculpatory. You know, Brady is a requirement that the other side give you what is exculpatory. You can't get to it fast enough, right? You have a situation where the juries are really, really they feel biased. Again, it's very difficult to prove that, right? The federal court system, the judges. We've never seen anything like it with the judges. And let me say, Donald Trump, President Trump is living with this. The grand jury impaneled in Washington, D.C. hears evidence all about Mar-a-Lago. and then when they're done, they read the evidence, the grand jury transcripts, to the Florida grand jury. And why did they do that? There's only one reason. Because the judge in D.C. was friendly to breaching attorney-client privilege and making sure that they had all the access they wanted. You wouldn't have gotten away with that in a normal federal district court. You're getting away with it here because this has been so politicized. So the civil rights, it's broadly, the system is breaking, and it's breaking in Washington, D.C.'s district court. The question is, what will we do about it? And I would submit, by the way, I second the idea, take away jurisdiction. Any January 6th crime should be, just put them anywhere. Put them in Denver, put them in Atlanta. Anywhere would be better than this. And you could do it tomorrow. Jurisdiction is completely yours to move that away. And I think that that's not been done enough. And also, everybody says they won't impeach judges. If you look closely at the conduct of the judges, there's a conversation to be had about why are they lecturing people? It doesn't happen in other places. So again, impeachment's harder standard. You guys are expert at that. But jurisdiction, tomorrow, you could get rid of jurisdiction and take these cases away.
One of the things I've been troubled by is the conduct of some of the public defenders who were supposed to be advocating for their clients. What should the Congress know or think about when we see public defenders in these cases going on social media and seemingly sharing their own bias against their own clients?
Yeah, again, a system, generously the system is straining to the breaking point. Taking away generosity, you're saying the system is totally gone. And it's again, the federal public defenders, if you're stuck with a federal, one of the organizations I work with, the Patriot Freedom Project, has raised money to pay for lawyers just to get private lawyers in. You go down the line, Brandon, John, Sarah, we're all trying to find ways to hire our own lawyers. That system is not breaking. Now, there's a lot of people, Congressman, that would say that the public defender system has been breaking for a long time. They're another subset of left-leaning people, and asking them to take a January 6th case, can you imagine? It's not, again, get the venue changed and go to a place where the federal public defender lives among people who actually hold the similar values. You might have a shot, but when you're in Washington, D.C., by their own admission, the people in Washington, D.C. and in the jury pools as well as in those courts have been inundated by the media and the select committee with a message that these are terrible people, and you can't unring that bell by asking them to abide by rules. By the way, let me drop, if I can, sorry, a footnote. The D.C. Bar is showing their true colors by breaking all the norms of the D.C. Bar to come after one guy, like they've done to other lawyers across the country. They have a project named the 65 Project, the left, with tens of millions of dollars to target the 65 lawyers who worked on election cases. And so our sides and the bar sits around and says, isn't that nice? We're activists. There's no one on our side saying Adam Schiff is an attorney under the California bar. He lied, according to the Durham report. Where's the bar complaint against him? Sua sponte, why don't they take it up like Durbin did, the senator did, to come after the general here? So the standard is not just double, it's one-sided, and it's penalizing we the people all the time.
We likely could have an entire hearing on just the weaponization of bar associations
Correct.
against people as a consequence of
I'd
their
like
politics. And we could have extensive testimony on that. But I do, before we adjourn, want to thank all of our panelists who have attended. There is work to do now, and what we have drawn into sharp relief from all of you and from my colleagues here is that we have to use the power of legislation. We have to use the power of appropriations riders. We have to use the power of the Holman Rule, as Dr. Gosar said, to look at specific bureaucrats who have turned against their oath. And we may have to use the powers of impeachment. And, Congresswoman Greene and I believe strongly in that when it is necessary, and we've taken action on that, and we have work to do to persuade some of our colleagues, and we endeavor to do that, and we're certain that the conversations you've had with us will help focus the Congress on some critical issues. Before we conclude, David Summerall has traveled here and represents the Stop Hate organization. I understand, Mr. Summerall, that you have a number of pieces of. I'm just recognizing you. I'm not recognizing you. I'm not going to interrogate you with questions. But I did want to recognize you for coming, and I do understand that there's a number of pieces of evidence that you'd like to share, and we're going to have our colleagues review that. And the evidentiary work continues, the legislative work continues, the oversight work continues, and we certainly are glad that you've all been here. to share this today.
Would it be possible to make a quick point before we adjourn?
Certainly.
Very briefly. Because Jerry very well pointed out, it's been pointed out the issue with jurisdiction. One thing I'd like you to know is not only are they not releasing jurisdiction of these cases, they're not releasing jurisdiction of our sentencing. So for any of us, even if we've pled guilty to, in my case, a Class B misdemeanor, which my attorney told me is akin to playing your music too loud on a Friday night. Well, I was sentenced to 3 months of house arrest and 3 years of federal probation, but even my federal probation is not being released, which my probation officer has told me is incredibly atypical. Typically, they would release my jurisdiction of my sentencing to my state or any of the state. So if, God forbid, any of us have to go before a judge again during the course of our probation, it would be a judge in our local jurisdiction. But the judges in D.C. are maintaining jurisdiction even of our sentencing, including these incredibly long probation periods. So that's something you should know as well.
I was unaware of that.
Yes.
It's very helpful, and it's worthy of review.
And the final point that I'd like to make is also about the plea deals, because this is a huge thing too. I believe as an American citizen, we're supposed to be presumed innocent until proven guilty. Unfortunately, the standard is so low. In my case, it didn't even go before a grand jury. I was arrested on what's called a complaint, meaning one FBI agent went to one judge and requested an emergency order to have me arrested and told the judge, we'd like to charge him with this felony and this felony and this felony, and the judge said, just absolutely go get him. And at that point, when presented with the options before me, I made the decision to take a plea deal. But I just want to be clear, if we actually had a legal system in which prosecutors were required to prove their case before bringing charges against people, this wouldn't be happening either.
Thank you all for taking the time to come here. We apologize for some of the scheduling delays and hobgoblins that arise during congressional votes, but this has been a highly productive endeavor, and we stand adjourned.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Good to see you, Congressman. Thanks for your kind words. And I'll talk to Andrew about something, giving a theme. Sorry we had to schedule ours. Appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Do we have a gavel?
We've got a press. Okay.
Oh, hey.
Nice to meet you in person. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Oh, yeah.
One thing that I forgot to ask really.
That would be good to look at.
Or your money will be joking.
For quite some time. It's the irony that it happened to be on the same day that Trump is being arraigned, President Trump is being arraigned in Miami. And I think it's tragic, and it's just proof of the weaponization of government and how it continues. People are suffering still today from the weaponized government, and President Trump is being arraigned on the same day that we're talking about an event that happened 2.5 years ago.
Why don't we like shift to right here?
Mr. Gaetz, can I ask you, you're having a field hearing here in the Capitol. What were your objectives with this J6 field hearing?
Well, Congresswoman Greene, Dr. Gosar, several of us are working on legislation during the appropriations process to try to constrain this type of violation of people's rights. When you hear about family members and friends getting hassled in airports, it certainly motivates us to look at how we can direct funding at the Department of Homeland Security and also some of the riders that we have with funding the DOJ, frankly. So developing an evidentiary basis for those future legislative endeavors, we hope, will help us convince our colleagues.
Ms. Greene, I'm wondering, is there a common thread in the testimony that you heard here today from these witnesses? If there is, what would that be if you could perhaps summarize that?
If I summarize it in one word, it would be terror. They feel terrorized by the government, and the way that they're being treated, each and every single one of them not only expressed terror that they feel from the government, but persecution. And then we learned today, it's not just them, it's their family members, people that were not even in Washington, D.C., they say are being harassed, patted down as they go through the airport to go fly anywhere. It's terrible. This shouldn't happen. And I'm so thankful that my colleague here, Matt Gaetz, helped organize this. We will be doing this again. But what our focus is right now is appropriations. Our power here in the House is the power of the purse. And appropriations is our tool to hold the weaponized government accountable. And that is what our focus is right now. And it's going to be a fight. We're going to have some of our colleagues that are going to want us just to fund the Department of Justice with no ramifications whatsoever. But we completely disagree with that, and we will be fighting that all the way. We'll use our voting cards, and we will be messaging and having as many conversations as we need to have here in Washington. I don't even care if we stay up here the rest of the summer. This is the most important battle that we have because American citizens are being treated worse than people that are invading our country with deadly fentanyl, human trafficking, sex trafficking, and trafficking children.
Speaking of which, you're talking about appropriations because the appropriations process is going on. Hal Rogers, he is the chairman of the sub-panel on the Appropriations Committee that deals with the Justice Department. How open is he to really, put the screws down onto the Justice Department and the FBI as far as appropriations is concerned?
Well, I just left the Five Families meeting before I came here in the Speaker's office, and appropriations was the discussion we were having. And there's going to be a breakdown where we can talk with the Cardinals and talk with many of the appropriators so that we can have more details about what these 12 separate appropriation bills are going to have in them, because many members want to know, especially conservatives, in the conference. We want to know where the money is going because we want to see the Holman Rule used widely and strongly. And I agree. These judges, their courtrooms, these prosecutors that are being assigned to these January 6th defendants, I think we need to start looking into how to hold them accountable as well.
Can you give us a little bit of a priority on some of the potential riders that you might be looking at on appropriations?
Well, the good news is we're really working hard to flatten the appropriations process so that they're all a priority. In this particular case, I think that some of the funds that are being used for consistent monitoring, for the maintenance of extended prison sentences and probationary periods might need to be looked at and capped.
And also, can you explain a little bit about this hearing? Have you tried to have this hearing at all through some of the other committees of jurisdiction over these issues? Why are you having this sort of field hearing here in the Capitol?
Congresswoman Greene and I have done multiple field hearings on everything from election integrity to crime. So this is really the continuation of a series of these hearings that we've done with Congressman Biggs, with Congressman Good, and many others. And we think that they function as a force multiplier for our committee process. And, Congresswoman Greene serves on oversight, I serve on judiciary, and so this is our work as a part of those committees to try to develop evidence to use to convince our colleagues that there's virtue in the legislative reforms on venue, on spending that we're seeking.
Congressman Gaetz, you mentioned venue. A lot of these J6 defendants feel that they don't get a fair trial because of Washington, D.C. and the jury pool, and then also the prosecutors and things. What steps could Congress potentially take to perhaps even the playing field a little bit?
Well, one thing Congress could do is liberate any litigant from the constraints of jurisdiction in Washington, D.C. We may tailor that a little bit more. But we've heard time and again that people are really concerned about the myopic thinking in this town, and it's unlike any other.
Does that committee have jurisdictions?
Yeah, we can set venue wherever we like it, and so we do that regularly in other matters, whether it's various class action lawsuits or other types of product liability or IP litigation. We venue that in specific places due to expertise around a subject area, and so I think that Washington, D.C.'s got all the wrong expertise when it comes to these types of matters, and I think that the venue reforms really anchor in a specific legislative solution some of the steps that we have to take forward.
All right, I saw hands back. Julie Kelly.
Hi, what's the status, the update of the impeachment resolution against Matthew Graves, and is there any stomach for pursuing impeachment of a few of these judges, including Beryl Howell in the D.C. District Court?
Well, I think you're looking at two people that have the stomach right here. Unfortunately, we don't have enough of us that are willing to take those measures. As far as Matthew Graves is concerned, there isn't enough support in our conference to impeach him, but there should be. And we will be continuing those conversations throughout the conference. I think many of our members are going to be hearing from their constituents when they go back home. I don't think people in Washington realize how angry Americans are and how, frankly, fed up they are that no one's ever held accountable. But this should be an interest for residents right here in Washington, D.C. to see Matthew Graves impeached. I know that many Democrats that live in the city can't even imagine why a U.S. attorney wouldn't prosecute 67% of the arrest. This is something that the chief of police is just, he can't even comprehend it. He wants these cases prosecuted. The mayor Muriel Bowser, wants these arrests prosecuted, but Matthew Graves can't see anything other than one day in history that was 2.5 years ago on January 6th. So we will keep working that angle. Thank you.
And what can you say to people? What can you say though to people who view this as a rewriting of the history of what happened for the world to see on January 6th, with an attack like we've never seen, on the Capitol? What do you say to those voices? And those criticisms?
We're trying to correct history. We put on evidence here today from some of the FBI whistleblowers that I've been interviewing, and they really showcase the extent to which the FBI wouldn't even share evidence with the FBI. That's a crazy story to me when the Boston field office says to the Washington field office, well, gosh, if you want us to predicate investigations, will you show us the evidence that would showcase any criminal conduct? And the Washington field office said that they wouldn't share information with the Boston field office because of their confidential human sources and those undercover agents who were involved on that day. And that runs in stark contrast to the testimony that Christopher Wray gave before the Congress. So where there is a misstatement of history, or where there is evidence that contradicts what was a prevailing narrative, we feel an obligation to put it forward and let the American people decide.
I would add one more thing. I think history has been a lie. I think that's a big problem. The FBI knows who the pipe bomber is. They had his car on camera, his tag on camera, and they never went and arrested that person. But yet they put up a wanted information all over their website. I would also say that history has been a lie. There's a person here, Taylor Hanson, that was an eyewitness to Ashley Babbitt's murder, had it on video, and the January 6th committee never questioned him. There's another person here, David Summerall, that has Stop Hate. His organization has the largest collection of video evidence outside of the Capitol's videos that we have here. I would say that history has been a lie because the January 6th committee run by the Democrats hired Hollywood producers and mainstream media to put on a show to tell their narrative of January 6th, when the real truth is Nancy Pelosi ignored the intelligence and refused to secure the Capitol and have the National Guard here. What we're trying to do is we're trying to correct the record so that history tells the truth. And that's the most important thing that we can do. To your question about the tapes, that's a question for Speaker Kevin McCarthy. I have no authority over them. Matt Gaetz has no authority over them. I, of course, want everyone to see the tapes, but I will tell you, the Department of Justice works for Joe Biden. The FBI works for Joe Biden. And if those tapes go out there and sedition hunters can spend 24/7 using their facial recognition software, then they're going to hunt down, they're going to dox, and they're going to reveal more people and turn them in. And then Matthew Graves, who is a pathetic excuse for a U.S. attorney, is going to harness his entire office to arrest more people, and they're going to rot in jail to be abused by someone called Kathleen Landerkin, the deputy warden here at the D.C. jail, who hates white men, hates President Trump, and hates people that went in the Capitol on January 6th. That's the reality of the situation. I hope the truth comes out for everyone, but I don't want to see anyone rot in jail anymore that just walked through an open door, and I don't want to see anyone see the same fate as Matthew Perna, who committed suicide under extreme persecution.
Congressman Greene, can we get you to investigate the FBI's connection with the sedition hunters? They are working together. Can we get you Congress members to investigate that?
We would love to. I would love more information about them. I would like to know if they have a grant or who donates to them. Yeah, thank you. Good question.
Congressman Greene, just one quick question. So, and I'm Brady Knox, the Washington Examiner. So you are one of the few Republicans who's able or willing to address the topic of January 6th. I think that most of your colleagues view it as almost a fifth rail. So what would you say to your colleagues who are afraid to speak about anything about January 6th, about the defendants, or because they're worried about the political ramifications of being associated with January 6th?
I tell them all the time, I think it's an issue you can't ignore. It's something that has to be talked about because people are being affected every single day by it, and we heard the testimonies today. So it's an issue that, of course, has been talked about every single day since January 6th, but we can't allow a weaponized government to persecute Americans. We just can't allow it. So it's something that we have to talk about.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, thank you. Hi, how's it going?
Doing all right.
I thought I spotted you back there.
Yeah.